Hey y'all, good evening. Thank you for joining me, Dorothy, on Through an Orthodox Christian Lens. It is September 14th, 2025. It's a Sunday, so I'm going to be sharing things about the church, the issues that are happening with the Orthodox Church, specifically Patriarch Bartholomew and the Ukrainian Church. So let's get started with this particular first article, which is a bit long. Just bear with me, but it's very important. We haven't heard anything lately on this. I will say that this particular website, the union journalists are a bit more blunt and harsh when they do their reporting than other news agency or journalists. But in any case, let's go to the article. Patriarch Bartholomew, I was wrong about Ukraine, but won't correct anything. Okay. In an interview with French TV, Patriarch Bartholomew made a number of statements concerning Ukraine. What do they mean in the short and long term? On September 7, 2025, the weekly Sunday program, Les Chemins de, I can't even pronounce it, The Paths of Faith, aired on the French TV channel France Télévisions. The program is dedicated to various religions, from Christianity to Buddhism. This time, it featured an interview with the head of the Constantinople Church, Patriarch Bartholomew. Part of the discussion was focused on Ukraine. But before moving on to that topic, we must pay attention to how Patriarch Bartholomew views the role of his see among the local Orthodox churches, as well as his remarks about the Council of Crete in 2016. An interviewer, Archpriest Zivko Panov, what is the role of the ecumenical patriarch? Is he the first among equals or the first without equals? The wording of this question points to a certain duality in how the Patriarch of Constantinople positions itself. On the one hand, Orthodox ecclesiology holds that not only are the heads of local churches equal among themselves, but that all bishops governing their dioceses are, in principle, equal. In Orthodoxy, there is no such sacred rank as the Roman Pope, who is considered above all bishops and holds authority over them. On the other hand, over the past 100 years or so, the Patriarchate of Constantinople has increasingly claimed to possess certain exceptional powers not inherent to any other patriarch, and certainly not to ordinary bishops. This new ecclesiology is expressed in a work by Archpriest Elpidophoros, I can't pronounce the last name, the current head of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. I just call him Archbishop L because I can't pronounce all that. Under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. The work is titled First Without Equals. Patriarch Bartholomew's response shows that he fully embraces this view. Quote, the primacy of Constantinople is not merely an honorary title. The Ecumenical Patriarchate has specific prerogatives, specific powers, so to speak. So Patriarch Bartholomew is essentially claiming that the head of the Patriarchate of Constantinople is a light version of the Pope. Though he may not claim to the title Vicar of Christ on earth, he nonetheless believes he possesses the rights that no one else has. This contradicts the Orthodox teaching about the Church, where no one has nor can have any exclusive powers. It's as if one of the apostles had told the others, I enjoy certain privileges that none of you do. Such fantasies would only make us smile, yet no one seems to smile when it comes to the words of the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople. Many even consider him to be correct. The canons of the Church speak only of a primacy of honor, which is limited to the fact that the name of the Patriarch of Constantinople is commemorated first during liturgical services in the diptychs, the list of the heads of the local churches. Moreover, even this primacy was conditioned by the political circumstances of the first millennium, during the time of the Eastern Roman Empire, whose capital was Constantinople. Thus, the Canon 3 of the Second Ecumenical Council states, the Bishop of Constantinople, however, shall have the prerogative of honor after the Bishop of Rome, because Constantinople is the new Rome. And Canon 28 of the Fourth Ecumenical Council says, we also do enact and decree the same things concerning the privileges of the Most Holy Church of Constantinople, which is the New Rome. For the fathers rightly granted privileges to the throne of the Old Rome because it was the royal city, and the 150 most religious bishops, actuated by the same consideration, gave equal privileges to the most holy throne of the New Rome, justly judging that the city, which is honored with the sovereignty in the Senate and enjoys equal privileges with the old imperial Rome. Let me see. So let me just say this quote from the Patriarch Bartholomew. The fact is that the Patriarch of Constantinople enjoys certain privileges that other primates do not have. From this point of view, he is the first without equals. These privileges belong exclusively to the ecumenical patriarch. Okay, but maybe they're explaining what this is, what do you think he's meaning here? Today, the conditions under which the canons defining the privileges of the Church of Constantinople were established no longer exist at all. Constantinople, once the capital of a mighty empire, the city of the sovereignty and the Senate, has long since become the provincial Muslim city of Istanbul, which isn't even the capital of Turkey. The only thing supporters of the first without equals theory can cite in defense of their claims is the decrees of Turkish sultans from the Ottoman Empire era. It was the sultans who made the Patriarch of Constantinople the head of the entire Greek millet, that is, the Christian population of the vast Ottoman Empire, which at various times in history encompassed nearly all of the ancient patriarchates. Indeed, there was a period, a fairly lengthy one, when the patriarchs of Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Antioch were independent only in name, but in practice lived in Constantinople under the patronage of the ecumenical patriarch and were completely dependent on him. However, it is doubtful that such historical circumstances relevant many centuries ago can serve as a basis for contemporary claims to primacy. Nevertheless, such claims are not only being put forward, Constantinople bishops are using them in their attempts to determine the fate of millions of believers. One such case is Ukraine. However, before addressing the issue of Ukraine, it is necessary to analyze Patriarch Bartholomew's view of the Council of Crete 2016 and the question of granting autocephaly. The idea of convening a pan-Orthodox council had been proposed roughly 100 years ago. As is well known, the ecumenical councils were convened during the first millennium, which in the second millennium the Orthodox Church seemingly lost the ability to resolve matters of its life through conciliar decision-making. However, many issues had accumulated, important, pressing matters requiring precisely a conciliar approach and resolution. But the council that took place in Crete in 2016 had no intention of addressing these issues. Even such an urgent question as the procedure for granting autocephaly was excluded from the agenda. And in essence, the Council of Crete was convened first to use its pan-Orthodox authority to affirm the theory of the first without equals, granting the Patriarch of Constantinople exclusive powers, and second, to open the door to ecumenical dialogue, primarily with the Catholic Church. However, at the last moment, 4 local churches, for various reasons, refused to participate, and as a result, the council simply did not turn out to be truly pan-Orthodox. Nevertheless, Patriarch Bartholomew, even today, nearly 10 years later, refuses to acknowledge this fact. Here's what he says. Unfortunately, at the last moment, 4 sister churches declined to participate in the council, which nevertheless successfully took place with 10 churches. I want to believe that, by the grace of God, and with the help of the Holy Spirit, we composed excellent texts. I would like them to be disseminated as widely as possible, so that the world can benefit from the united voice of orthodoxy as it was expressed at the Council of Crete. But how can one speak of a united voice of orthodoxy when just moments earlier the Patriarch admitted that 4 local churches refused to participate in its work? Moreover, these 4 churches, in terms of clergy and faithful, outnumber the 10 that gathered in Crete. Wow. Of course, conciliar wisdom is not measured by the number of communities within a given local church, but neither is it measured simply by the arithmetic number of local churches. The Council of Crete was not successful, yet Patriarch Bartholomew continues to assert that the decisions made by the council are binding for all, including those churches whose representatives were absent in Crete. As for the issue of granting autocephaly during the preparatory phase for the council, it was removed from the agenda because the Patriarchate of Constantinople insisted that only it had the authority to grant autocephaly, regardless of which local church the new church was separating from. Naturally, the other churches disagreed, as this would mean that any schismatic group and any local church could be legitimized by a decision of the Patriarchate of Constantinople, which is precisely what the Fanar did in Ukraine. For its part, the Patriarchate of Constantinople was unwilling to agree that autocephaly should be granted by the common consent of all the churches. Quote, although only the ecumenical patriarch had the right to grant autocephaly, starting with the Russian Church and then all the Balkan churches, our Patriarchate proposed that the ecumenical patriarch would make the decision and sign it, while the primates of the other churches would participate in the decision and sign it along with him. In other words, the patriarch's proposal to the other churches regarding the granting of autocephaly was in fact no different from the existing practice. The decision would be made by Constantinople in any case, while the other primates were assigned the role of mere bystanders. It's no surprise that the local churches rejected such a proposal. This statement, like many previous ones, shows that Patriarch Bartholomew is convinced that only he has the right to grant autocephaly. This conviction is unfounded. There are no canons that establish this right for him. Historically, Constantinople did indeed grant the status of autocephaly to various churches. However, it should be remembered that first, almost all of these churches existed in countries that were gained freedom from the yoke of the Ottoman Empire, which subjected all Christians not only to the spiritual but also to the administrative authority of the Patriarch of Constantinople. And second, the Patriarchate of Constantinople did not so much grant autocephaly as recognize an already established situation, i.e. a self-declared autocephaly. Sometimes this recognition took many years or even decades. For example, the so-called Bulgarian Schism lasted more than 70 years. It should also not be forgotten that the Patriarchate of Constantinople was not the only one to grant autocephaly. For example, the Russian Church granted autocephaly in 1961 to the Church of the Czech lands and Slovakia, and in 1970 to the Orthodox Church in America. The former was recognized by Constantinople only in 1998 in the form of a repeated grant of autocephaly, while the latter has still not been recognized. So let's go to the Ukraine Church. And finally, about the autocephaly of the Ukrainian Church. The question itself was formulated with understanding. Here is how it was posed by Archpriest Zivko Panov, a member of the Diocesan Canonical Commission of the Archdiocese of Orthodox Churches of the Russian Tradition in Western Europe, Moscow Patriarchate. In 2019, you granted the Tomos of autocephaly to the New Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Now, there are two Orthodox churches in Ukraine, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, led by Metropolitan Epifani, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, headed by Metropolitan Onufri. Why was such a decision made? The priest asked why the Tomos of autocephaly was granted to the new church, while the old Ukrainian Orthodox Church still exists. Why did Patriarch Bartholomew grant autocephaly only to a part of the Ukrainian Orthodox faithful, and a relatively small one at that? But Patriarch Bartholomew does not answer this question. Instead, he begins to talk about the right of Ukrainians to receive autocephaly and the right of the Patriarchate of Constantinople to grant it. Is he really paying attention? Sounds like he's not really paying attention. Quote, at that time, our Patriarchate made this decision, believing that the Ukrainian Church has the right to gain independence, and this was after numerous appeals to the Ecumenical Patriarchate, not only in recent years, but also much earlier, in the 1920s and even before. Here, Patriarch Bartholomew completely reveals himself, but this becomes clear only if one knows the history. The fact is that the Ukrainian Church has never petitioned the Patriarchate of Constantinople for autocephaly. It was done only by politicians and various, very small schismatic groups that the Patriarchate of Constantinople, in most cases, recognized as excommunicated from the Church, and naturally refused any autocephaly. The mention of the 1920s is especially strange, since it was then that Ukrainian self-proclaimed hierarchs applied for autocephaly, but they didn't have a single legitimate bishop. And suddenly, Patriarch Bartholomew tells Father Zydko Panev that based on these appeals, he eventually granted autocephaly to the OCU. Essentially, this is self-discrediting, although there could be an assumption that Panev was not particularly familiar with the church history of Ukraine. Next, in response to the priest's question, Patriarch Bartholomew spoke about the appeal made by Ukrainian hierarchs of the UOC in the early 1990s requesting autocephaly. This also does him no credit, as it is well known that these signatures were obtained by then Metropolitan of Kiev, Filaret Denitsenko, through strong authoritarian pressure, and when several bishops withdrew their signatures, they were subjected to severe reprisals. Patriarch Bartholomew also once again asserted the right of the Patriarchate of Constantinople to grant autocephaly to Ukraine, despite the fact that such a claim is groundless. The next question concerns the issue of schism, which did not disappear with the granting of the Thomas. The priest says, 6 years after this autocephaly, Orthodox Christians in Ukraine are still divided. Do you believe that unity will eventually be achieved, and what, in your opinion, is the path toward that? In this question, there is a barely concealed reproach. How is it that in 2018 and 2019, Patriarch Bartholomew claimed that the Russian Orthodox Church had failed for many years to heal the schism in Ukraine? And now he would resolve the issue swiftly with his wise decision? But 6 years has passed, and the division has only deepened. What went wrong? And here Patriarch Bartholomew began making statements that until recently would have been considered unthinkable. Our goal is to unite all of the Orthodox churches of Ukraine, both Metropolitan Onufri and Metropolitan Epiphany, so that they are united in theory and in practice, become one local church, and are recognized by the other sister Orthodox churches. So he wants the schismatic church and the canonical church to be one. How can you do that with a schismatic church? First of all, since 2019, Patriarch Bartholomew has refused to recognize Metropolitan Onufri as the legitimate Metropolitan of Kiev. In 2022, he said that all hierarchs of the UOC are merely titular bishops, whom he, in his great mercy and humility, still tolerates on his canonical territory, that is, in Ukraine. According to Patriarch Bartholomew, the only legitimate Metropolitan of Kiev is Serhii or Epiphany Demenko, who, in his view, has authority over absolutely all Orthodox communities in Ukraine, even if they do not agree with this. And suddenly he speaks of the UOC as a really existing church. This is something entirely new. Secondly, Patriarch Bartholomew now wants the UOC and the OCU to unite into one local church, although previously he had stated that only individual structures of the UOC might join the OCU, since the OCU already exists as the autocephalous Ukrainian church. Thirdly, Patriarch Bartholomew reverses the sequence of events. While earlier he insisted that the OCU would gradually be recognized by all local churches, today he says that first, the UOC and the OCU must unite, and only then will the local churches recognize this unified structure. Furthermore, Patriarch Bartholomew assured that delays in the recognition of autocephaly are a completely normal phenomenon, and that it will happen sooner or later. While earlier he spoke of the rapid recognition of the OCU by the local churches, now he is saying that the process may take decades. And one of the most important statements made by Patriarch Bartholomew, the Ecumenical Patriarchate does not intend to revoke its decision to grant autocephaly to Ukraine. I want to be clear on this matter. What this means. Everything said by Patriarch Bartholomew in his interview with French television may mean the following. Firstly, despite the obvious failure of the OCU project, despite the fact that the religious organization headed by Epiphany Demenko has earned the reputation of a church of crowbars and angle grinders due to its violent seizures of temples, and despite the deepening of the ecclesiastical schism in Ukraine, which was, in fact, acknowledged by Patriarch Bartholomew himself, Constantinople has no intention of backing down and will continue to push its line to the end. This is really bad news. Really bad news. However, if you go by the prophecies, this will change. Patriarch Bartholomew's mistake with the OCU project is now obvious to everyone. In fact, by stating that the unification of Ukrainian Orthodox believers is still something that lies ahead, he essentially admitted this himself. But the Patriarch is unable to correct his mistake. The inability to correct one's own mistakes is something that happens to many people in life. However, when such mistakes are made by someone who claims the status of first without equals, they affect the lives of millions and come at too great a cost. Secondly, by refusing to revoke the Thomas, Patriarch Bartholomew has indirectly confirmed that he does not intend to convene a pan-Orthodox council or meeting on the Ukrainian issue, which many primates and bishops of local churches have called for. Thirdly, Patriarch Bartholomew no longer expects the process of OCU recognition by the local churches to continue. The fact that he now speaks of this process taking decades is quite telling. No one beyond the churches of Greece, Alexandria, and Cyprus will recognize the OCU, and this has now been understood in the Phanar. We would even dare to suggest that we might see one of them eventually revoke its recognition, if not explicitly, then in a veiled manner. For example, on Mount Athos, some monasteries that previously recognized the OCU now refuse to receive its clergy or can celebrate with them. Fourthly, the change in rhetoric toward the UOC and Metropolitan Onufri by Patriarch Bartholomew should not mislead anyone. The fact that he now speaks of the existence of the UOC and its primate, whom he previously described as canonically non-existent, does not mean that the Phanar will respect the UOC's position or speak in its defense against persecution by the Ukrainian authorities. No, the Patriarchate of Constantinople will continue to welcome the destruction of the UOC and will point to only one solution: unification with the OCU. Is he totally blind? Fifthly, Patriarch Bartholomew's interview is a warning bell for Domenko, Zoria, and other leaders of the OCU. Despite the claims that the Thomas will not be taken away from them, the shift in the ecumenical patriarch's rhetoric is already quite significant. In fact, the Phanar has acknowledged that regarding the unification of Orthodox Christians in Ukraine, or rather the lack of unification, everything has actually reverted to the situation of 2018. And this means that there will definitely be changes in the Ukrainian church issue, and it's not certain that they will be to Epiphany's advantage. So this situation just continues. This situation continues with the what's terribly going wrong with the Ukrainian church, the canonical one and the schismatic one. He has not. He doesn't want to put this council together when other churches are requesting it. He thinks he's above everybody else, apparently. He has no equals, which was shocking to read. I hadn't really been following up on all of this, and now I see this, and this is disturbing. It's wrong, in my opinion. And so, well, we will see, but it may not, as it said at the end, it may not go in the direction that the schismatics want with this Thomas, but the prophecies say that this will be situated later with King John. Anyway, long one, but an important one to see an update on this, because we haven't really seen too many updates. This has been going on since that time, 2018, and we know that the State Department was involved in that, heavily involved, because, the Patriarch would ask for the U.S.'s help because of the being in Turkey and how it's been pretty much, somewhat oppressed and the problems there. So I think he was compromised by the U.S. State Department. And then you had those ignorant people like Pompeo, who has no idea about the Ukrainian history, the Russian Church, they did nothing about the Orthodox Church, and thinking this is all about religious freedom, opens his mouth, and they get involved in our churches, our Orthodox churches, and they shouldn't be. So that's the first thing I wanted to tell you, to share with you. The second story is quite disturbing as well. So a mobilized UOC priest killed at the front. Okay, this came out a couple days ago. Father Mikola Klan was mobilized despite being under trial. In early September 2025, a mobilized priest of the something or other eparchy, Archpriest Mikola Klan, was killed at the front, reports the UOJ sources. He was the rector of the Transfiguration community in the village of something or other district. According to the UOJ, the priest was mobilized quite not long ago. He was sent to the front line where he was almost immediately killed. This is so tragic. First off, priests, clergy are not supposed to fight in wars. They're not supposed to pick up arms against anybody. They're not supposed, because it's for them. They're not allowed to do that because they're not supposed to be, they can't kill anybody. They can't be violent. They are not supposed to be involved in wars. He was mobilized despite being in the status of a defendant. In March 2025, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison for, quote, inciting religious hatred, end quote, criticism of the OCU. That's the Schismatic Church. And, quote, justifying Russian aggression, end quote. The defense filed an appeal against the court's verdict, which had not yet come into force pending review. The appellate court hearing was scheduled for October 14th. Until then, Father, now they're saying Nikolai, but they said Mikola and Minimnu. Anyway, remained free on bail of 58,400 UAH. According to the conditions of the first instance verdict, he was required to reappear in the court upon first request, not leave his place of residence, and wear an electronic bracelet according to the law. Individuals involved in a judicial process cannot be mobilized. That's another thing that he couldn't be mobilized for. Earlier, the UOJ reported that in the Revny region, UOC Bishop Seraphim was mobilized. I just found this story tragic, for obvious reasons that I just mentioned. They're not supposed to be. Sorry, my cat's visiting me. They're not supposed to be in wars. They're not, and then he was in, court. He wasn't supposed to go then. So there was 2 reasons why he shouldn't have been in that situation. And of course, he was killed immediately when he got in there, because he's not going to fight. He's not going to hold, take up a weapon. This just really is disturbing. Very, very sad what's going on in Ukraine. I just feel like the Ukrainians are not getting any breaks. They just continue to be persecuted. They continue to be treated like dirt, like they're worth nothing. What a mess. These stories are really important, though, because we need to know what's going on with them. One last story with the Ukrainian issue. Authorities allowed Demenko into Lavra's near caves. Now, these apparently are not the same section of the Lavra caves, because this is the near caves. There's the far caves, the something other caves, and now the near caves. So now they allowed them into this section. He reported that he prayed for certain work to be crowned with success. So on the 12th, the Lavra Reserve Administration allowed Epiphany Demenko and his colleagues into the near caves of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, where he performed a mulbin, reports the OCU website. Afterwards, Demenko reminded that he had already conducted a similar religious event in the far caves, where the necessary work for the preservation of this great Ukrainian shrine was successfully carried out. So, it really sounds very odd. Encouraged by this success, he now decided to perform a mulliban for the beginning of a good deed. What deed? Good deed in the near caves, so that such work here would also be crowned with success. Crowned with success. I mean, this just does not sound like an Orthodox hierarch, which we all know why it doesn't sound like one. What this work entails, Epiphany did not specify, probably because he had no idea what he was doing. The event was attended by the acting head of the Lavra Reserve. Yes, this particular person's name. Earlier, the UOJ reported that Domenko performed the first liturgy in the Lavra's Far Caves. Yes, if you remember that story. So, yeah, lots of stuff going on still with the Ukrainian issue, but a lot of stuff having to do with the mistake that Patriarch Bartholomew did, that he's not willing to totally correct. Oh, he thinks he's made a mistake, but I'm not going to correct it. Well, what good does that do? That's not going to help the people of the churches. It's not going to help them at all. So, just sharing the newest going on. We need to pray hard for Ukraine and the Ukrainian church. Just terrible. I mean, the last story was so horrific with the relics of the saints. But please, let's just pray that this persecution ends soon. Very soon. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for following my channel. I hope you found this informative and interesting. I know it was a long piece, but hopefully you got something out of it. Okay, so I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Until next time.